Have you ever wondered if your metabolism is actually broken and if that's the reason why you can't lose weight? I'm Steve Wright, co-creator of Solving Leaky Gut. In this video, I'm talking with Dan Pardi. He's a sleep researcher and a metabolic researcher, and he's one of the leading experts on how do we overcome obesity and weight gain. We're talking about what he calls the black swan effect of obesity in this video, and we're actually talking about what happens with metabolism as we gain weight. Does it actually break, and what can we do about it so we can finally lose weight again? Let's listen.
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's, that term is thrown around all the time. If I've got a broken metabolism and so what's going on? Well, metabolism is basically just chemical processes that occur within a living organism to try to maintain life. So generally there's two classes, and one of it is constructive metabolism or anabolic metabolism, right? And this is the building up of the synthesis of proteins and carbohydrates and fats to form tissue, right? And to store energy, right? And then the other one is more of a catabolic process or a destructive metabolism. This is the breaking down of chemical substances so that you can produce energy or to excrete waste, right? So generally, at a high level, that's what metabolism is, right? It's affecting the building up of proteins and the breaking down of energy so that the body can maintain tissue and also have enough energy to, for the various processes that it needs to undergo on a day by day, minute by minute, second by second basis.
So if I'm overweight, is my metabolism broken?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the answer is maybe. And so if we take it in light of what we just said, is the metabolism broken? Oftentimes, by the way, one other thing that I will mention around metabolism is a big goal of this build up and breakdown process is to maintain something called homeostasis or balance, right? And so the body has incredible mechanisms to try to maintain balance in the face of challenges. So, for example, if it's cold outside and the body wants to maintain balance of the core body temperature, right, the body can start to shiver, right? And the shivering, which is rapid muscular contractions, which can then produce heat, can keep the body warm for a little bit. So it's one way it can withstand that shock. And conversely, if it's really hot outside, the body can start to sweat. The evaporation of the sweat on the skin can help to basically get rid of some of the some body heat, and it can also help to keep body core. So these are just ways that the body will react in this dynamic fashion to try to maintain balance, and that's just one example. Okay, that's just one example. So your question is, can metabolism be broken, right? And another way to look at it is there a way that, can, over time, if you're existing either within, if you challenge that system enough, if you challenge that balance enough, then things can go wrong. And then that can lead to essentially a new steady state, like a new existence, right? So your new balance or your new body is operating at a different level than it was before, and perhaps not as efficiently as it was before. So yes, this can happen.
I like that because something that I'm always trying to tell people, Dan, is that I believe our bodies they have our best interests at heart. And so it was really hard for me to love my body, love pictures of me. And as a matter of fact, I hated them all when I was fat. Yeah. And at the same time, I think what you're just talking about and the newer research might be suggesting that my body was just gaining weight to save my butt because of what the environment I was in, the food choices I was making, the lifestyle choices I was making. And so I like coming full circle on these terms and not making things good or bad, and really adopting this idea that the body has my back. It's really trying to keep me alive. And so we just need to start to understand what's going on with the gut, brain, the metabolism, and all these things, and begin to kind of reset the table and say, okay, body, like what would make it better for you to not, carry this amount of fat?
So I gave a presentation at PaleoFX, and it was titled "Why We Get Fat." And in the very beginning, I showed something called an obesity systems map, which essentially is something with a ton of squiggly lines pointing at different kind of categories of influences. And the point is that there are a huge amount of things that have shown to influence basically this homeostasis in the body, or body balance, right? That can lead to the accumulation of stored body fat, right? A huge amount of influences. Now, just trying to understand all of those, in their own right, each individual category, more or less all the different ways that the categories interact. They interact across generations. They interact between, the maternal to child relationship and overdevelopment, and within an environment, and after a virus load, and change in the microbiota, and, changing in eating. It's, in some ways, it almost seems like an unknowable, answer. It's like so computationally complex. And yet at the same time, there are things that come to the surface that, I think a lot of us are now becoming more aware of, that help us direct our focus and our attention for interventions on hopefully more promising areas, right? Because I don't think that people's intentions, 10, 15 years ago, today, before that, to try to help people be, healthy, whether it was like, low-fat guidance or to exercise at the time, which has been, now somewhat maligned within kind of the popular, health culture memes. Those were, people were just trying to do their best at that time based off of the information that they had. And I think because of the internet, because information sharing is so much easier now, these new ideas can kind of bubble up to the surface that can get attention. Some of that is good and some of it is not good. But through it all, I think that overall, because, we're going to be able to have a greater likelihood of being able to, I think, get to the root of the problem more quickly.
Awesome, Dan. Well, let's talk about, as you just mentioned, obesity and actually even leaky gut. We've talked about in the leaky gut course here that there's likely over 19. Right now, the scientific research is very clear on 19 triggers of ways that our guts could become leaky. So as science progresses, as human knowledge progresses, that's going to grow very likely. And so what you're talking about here is we're talking about something else that's very complex, obesity and homeostasis of the body. So with that said, let's kind of dive into what we know now about the gut and the brain and obesity. And, how do we begin with that? Like, where do you like to begin to tell the story about what we know right now?
Yeah. So I'll mention one other thing about obesity before I answer that question. And it has to do with that obesity, when we think of it, what is obesity? Obesity is categorized as a body mass index of 30, which is essentially looking at your height to weight ratio, right? And that's how it is defined, right? But that doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening on the inside, because you could be at that phenotype, or you could have that appearance, that physical appearance, and yet there's different things that could be happening under the surface. But a big point that I want to make is that there are about 50 or more comorbidities that associate with the prevalence of obesity. So, for example, if somebody is obese, then their risk for over 50 different conditions is increased, right? So perhaps obesity is just a marker of a bigger problem that is going on, right? It's one way that we can identify this dishomeostasis, right? And that, I think, is the segue into then talking about the gut microbiota. Because 10, 15 years ago, sleep, microbiota, these things were not a part of the conversation, any estimate or any model for why we were becoming overweight, right? It was this energy balance equation that was, energy in, energy out. And that still has a lot of truth to it, but it was too facile. It wasn't understanding these intervening variables that were modulating, that equation very potently. And I call them, these kind of black swan effect, right? Nobody saw them coming, and then the research started to accumulate. And now I think we're just really in the most nascent stages of understanding this gut-brain connection. And likewise, obesity is only one ramification of the wrong relationship with our gut and the rest of our physiology, which is a field of metagenomics, right? It's this interaction between the huge amount of gut microbiota's genes and how they interact with our own genes, right? So it's a new field that is looking kind of into this topic.